I found the tapes on a rain-dark afternoon, the sky heavy with bruised clouds that seemed to press against my skull. The box was small and unmarked, its corners softened by age and something sticky I couldn't place. When I opened it, a faint odor of damp leather and ozone curled around me like a warning. Inside lay 5 reels of brittle magnetic tape, each labeled in hurried Cyrillic, Ivdel, Monaraga, Dyatlov. I set up the old reel-to-reel player in the corner of my study, its motor groaning as if waking from a century-long slumber. The first spool spun to life under a dull amber lamp, and the hiss of static filled the room, sharp as shattered glass. Then came the whisper, so soft I thought the machine had hiccuped, until it gathered strength, repeating a single word I swear I recognized, Pomogi. My heart thudded in my throat. Outside, rain tapped against the window pane with a timid insistence. But inside, the air grew still, electric. I leaned forward, the leather chair creaking beneath me, and heard it again. A faint chorus of voices overlapping, tangled, as if a dozen people spoke through the same weary throat. Each whispered plea wove into my chest like a cold finger tracing my spine. I paused the tape, hands trembling, and smelled the undercurrent of scorched pine, an odor that could only belong to the Ural wilderness. I wasn't sure whether I was saving them or damning myself, but even before I pressed play again, I knew I could never turn away. The second reel began with a low rumble, as if the mountains themselves were shifting. Beneath that distant growl came the snap of twigs and a muted shuffle, like heavy boots sinking into moss. I pressed my ear closer to the speaker and inhaled sharply. An undercurrent of wet pine and cold iron filled my lungs. Then a voice, calm, almost bored, reading coordinates into a recorder. The numbers were punctuated by static, each digit echoing against invisible rock walls. After the coordinates, laughter, soft, menacing, a single note that hung in the air longer than reason allowed. I rewound the tape and listened again. This time the laughter warped into a keening sorrow, as if the same mouth had switched masks mid-sentence. The speaker whispered, "It's coming," then hesitated before adding, "And it remembers us." The motor whined under the weight of unspoken terror. My skin prickled with cold, though the lamp burned warmly beside me. The shadows on the wall trembled, and I half expected them to take shape and step forward. Swallowing against a dry throat, I lifted the lid of my laptop and pulled up the Dyatlov expedition route, overlaying the reel's coordinates. They pointed to a ravine south of Kolatsiakl, Dead Mountain, the locals called it. Legends spoke of howls in winter nights, but scientists had dismissed them as wind. The tape insisted otherwise. Every shift in static felt like a footstep just out of sight. A sudden hiss made me jump. The recorder's spool slowed, groaning, and then fell silent. I stared at the blank tape, heart hammering, until there it was again. A faint voice tangled in white noise. "We should have stayed together." The ache behind those words was primal. I could almost taste the cold air off a frozen campsite, smell the campfire's acrid smoke, feel the panic of isolation. I sat back and pressed pause, my hands trembling. The reel-to-reel player seemed heavier now, as though anchoring me to something vast and unknowable. The room felt too small. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the hush of wet pavement. But in my study, the silence was alive, pregnant with voices that begged me to listen. I realized then I couldn't turn away. I had to follow their trail into that ravine, because they were still speaking. And if I refused, their whispers would haunt me forever. I arrived in Yekaterinburg just as pale light seeped over iron rooftops, the air tinged with diesel and damp stone. From the airport, I caught a rattle-worn bus northward, the windows smeared with mud so thick I could barely see the dark silhouette of the Urals rising ahead. Inside the bus, the collective breath of half-sleeping passengers fogged the glass. and somewhere beneath the seats, a single gear clicked with every pothole. I pressed my palm against the cold pane, tracing an invisible trail toward the place where those tapes had begun. In Ivdel, I found the last phone signal and stocked up on supplies. Extra batteries, a canvas tent, and an old military folding knife whose steel smelled of chlorine and bitter metal. The station's lone cafe offered black tea so strong it burned my throat, mingling with the faint taste of soot. At dusk, I hired a driver in a beaten Lada. He said nothing of legends, only stared at the rearview mirror as though expecting a passenger who wasn't there. The forest soon swallowed us. Each tree loomed bowed by unseen weight, the earth beneath ankle-deep frost that crackled like whispered accents. I chose a clearing near the ravine and pitched my tent. The wind rose, rattling the canvas overhead like distant chains. I unpacked the third reel and threaded it into a battery-powered player, my only link to 6 vanished young lives. The tape hissed alive, and for a moment all I heard was the breath of the machine. Then a single word, drawn out, trembled through the speaker. Remember. It sounded like my own voice speaking from somewhere beneath those snow-clad slopes. My fingers went numb. I lifted my gaze to the dark tree line and felt an impulse to dig into the frozen earth, to uncover what lay just below. The moment stretched. I could have stopped, walked away, but the whisper came again, urgent and clear this time. Find me. My goal crystallized. I had to follow their path into that silent abyss, no matter what truths I might unearth. A chill settled into my bones as I stepped into the ravine's mouth, the sky overhead narrowing to a slit of iron. The scent of wet stone and decaying pine needles rose in slow spirals, mixing with a breath of something sharper, ozone, like after a distant thunderclap. My boots sank into frost-hardened moss. Each step came with a muffled snap that echoed against unseen walls of spruce. I paused to listen. Between my own ragged breaths, I thought I heard it. A soft scrape, like fingernails dragging over bark. Yet when I shone my headlamp, the beam found nothing but shadow. The remains of the first campsite lay half-buried beneath a thin crust of ice. A twisted tent frame, an overturned thermos whose red enamel was chipped to reveal bare metal, and scraps of cloth yellowed with age. I knelt and ran a fingertip along the frozen fabric. Its fibers crackled like brittle paper. Beneath it, I found a scrap of notebook, pages soaked through and frozen in time. The graphite scrawl was jagged. We lost D. It's so quiet we can hear our hearts. No stars. My heart thumped at the familiarity of that terror. I folded the page into my pocket, warmth from my body beginning to thaw its edges. A sudden gust stirred the trees overhead, sending a cascade of needles rattling to the ground like dozens of tiny skeletons. The wind carried a faint melody, too far away to identify but unmistakably human. Half laughed, half cried. I followed the sound deeper, moving around dank boulders slick with lichen. My breath came in ragged bursts, each exhale a swirl of mist that vanished too quickly. Around me, the ravine floor sloped toward a narrow gully, and in its depths lay a circle of footprints pressed into the frost. 9 boot imprints, then one that trailed off, as if the wearer had stumbled and crawled away. My pulse surged. The footprints beckoned me forward. I sank to my knees and laid the 4th reel beside the tattered notebook. The tape player's motor whined a protest in the frigid air. I pressed play. For a long moment, there was only static, white noise that felt alive, shifting like a breathing creature. Then a voice, distant and tired, said, "We thought it was the wind," but it answered. The words spat out, heavy with wonder and dread. I shivered as the temperature plunged, my breath freezing on my lips, beads of frost forming on my jacket. The speaker continued in a whisper so low I had to strain. "It speaks in ours. We are not alone." The line went dead, replaced by a low, rhythmic thrum, like a heartbeat under the earth. It matched my own pulse, and my head swam. I snapped the tape off and jammed it into my backpack, my fingers numb. Around me, the ravine pressed closer, its walls narrowing until the only escape was straight ahead, into darkness that pulsed with that hidden heartbeat. I realized then that I had passed the point of no return. To turn back now would mean abandoning the voices that reached through time to touch me, and I could not do it. I rose, every nerve alight with cold fire, and stepped into the gully, following the faint echo that lured me deeper into the mountain's silent heart. The gully opened into a narrow throat of stone so dark my headlamp's beam vanished into nothingness. The air tasted of iron and wet clay, prickling my tongue with each breath. I crouched to squeeze through the gap, fingers brushing damp walls slick with moss that left a cold smear on my skin. Every step echoed, as if the mountain itself were sighing under my weight. The path sloped downward, and I felt the temperature drop, an unnatural chill that seeped into my lungs and made them ache. Water dripped somewhere far above, each drop detonating in the silence like a distant bell. I closed my eyes to listen, and in that hush I heard it, a soft murmur, familiar and fractured, as though the Dyatlov group's voices were replaying in a broken chorus. "Stay together," one said. "Don't leave the light." Another rasped, "It's patient." I froze, my heart lodged in my throat. The words weren't on any tape I'd heard. They came from here, from somewhere ahead, where the darkness had weight. I moved forward again, every sense straining. The walls narrowed until I could touch both sides with outstretched arms. The ceiling dropped so low I had to stoop. The ground beneath was loose shale that crunched underfoot, sending tiny pebbles clattering down the slope. My headlamp caught something glinting at the far end, a pale, waxy shape. As I approached, the beam revealed a cluster of twisted boots, layers of footprints frozen in a pattern that spiraled toward a low archway carved into the rock. The prints overlapped each other, as if each wearer had walked the same circle again and again, searching for an escape. I knelt beside them, tracing the deepest print with a gloved finger. The cold bit through the fabric. Condensation formed on the sole in delicate filigree. I exhaled and watched my breath billow, then halted. Something beyond the arch shifted. A faint glow pulsed from within, pale and blue, like moonlight filtered through ice. I rose, every hair on my arms standing on end. The whisper came at my ear, urgent. "Remember us." It wasn't on any recorded reel, I was sure of that. Yet it felt like a memory I had always known but forgotten. My pulse thundered as I stepped through the arch. The world tilted. Walls opened into a circular chamber, its floor studded with crystalline formations that hummed beneath my boots, sending vibrations up my spine. Light emanated from within the crystals, flickering in time with my heartbeat. A tang of ozone and something metallic filled my mouth. I realized with a jolt that the voices hadn't stopped. They fused with the hum, birthing a melody of lament. Each note carried longing, regret, and something else I could not name. I wanted to run, to flee back up the gully into the safe gray light of dawn. Instead, I knelt and pressed my palm against the nearest crystal, its surface smooth and impossibly cold. The hum deepened into a wordless chorus, and in that instant I understood. They hadn't vanished. They had become part of this place, and if I sought the truth, I would join their song or shatter it forever. My fingers lingered on the crystal's surface, and the chamber shuddered as though startled by my touch. The humming swelled into a symphony of distant sobs and laughter, each note resonating through my bones. I staggered back, the rough stone floor scraping my palms as I regained my footing, heart pounding so fiercely it drowned out the chorus for a moment. Then it broke through again, clearer, a teenage voice whispering the exact words my mother once spoke to me, soft and full of regret. My breath caught in my throat. Memories I hadn't thought of in years flickered across my mind like wounded birds. Around me, the crystals pulsed in unison, bathing the chamber in that cold, spectral light. The scent of ozone grew sharper, stinging my nostrils, and I tasted metal on my tongue. It felt as if the mountain itself were exhaling its sorrow through those glowing prisms, begging for release. I thought of the tapes, their pleas for help, and the worn notebook's frantic warning. I realized then that this place was not merely a grave, but a vault, a prison of fractured souls preserved in ice and sound. Fear clawed at me, but beneath it stirred a profound sorrow. I wanted to turn away, to flee back through the gully into the safe embrace of skepticism and daylight. Yet every fiber of my being recoiled at the thought of leaving them here, their voices trapped in eternal lament. My goal sharpened into something both reckless and righteous. I would set them free, no matter the cost. I closed my eyes and pressed my palm against the largest crystal, feeling the hum penetrate my flesh. Visions blurred before me, snow-laden forests, the frantic glow of flashlights, the final moments of laughter that curdled into terror. I heard my own voice among theirs, promising, "I remember." The boundary between past and present dissolved. In that instant, I understood that memory was a living thing, hungry and dangerous, and as the chamber's light pulsed faster, I knew I was about to become part of its story forever, or shatter its fragile prison once and for all. I raised the knife and struck the crystal's edge. The sound was not a crack, but a keening, a high, heart-wrenching cry that shattered every other noise in the chamber. Fragments of light rained across the walls in 1,000 shards, each reflecting the frozen faces of those who had whispered through time. The humming swelled into a roar that pressed against my eardrums, and then, just as suddenly, fell silent. A gush of warm air rushed past me, carrying away the metallic scent of ozone and leaving behind only the faint, bittersweet perfume of pine. The crystals, once pulsing with cold light, dissolved into mist that drifted upward through the archway and vanished. In the quiet that followed, I heard nothing but my own ragged breathing, and I realized the voices were gone. Free at last from this stone tomb, the floor trembled beneath my boots, as if the mountain were sighing in relief. I scrambled to my feet, heart thundering, and stumbled back through the gully. Above me, the sky had lightened to a bruised lavender, and the forest seemed to lean inward, as though curious about the change. I did not stop until the ravine mouth closed behind me, sealing its secret once more. When I returned to camp, the abandoned reels lay undisturbed in the snow. I gathered them gently, feeling the weight of their silence in my pack. I knew then that some truths demand to be buried, and that memory, once released, cannot be contained. On the bus back to civilization, I stared out the window at the receding mountains and felt a hollow ache where certainty once was. I had come seeking answers, but I left with something far more fragile and profound. The realization that every memory carries a life of its own, and that to remember is to risk becoming part of the story. I sold the tapes and notebook to a private archive, under the strictest conditions that they never be played. Even now, I sometimes wake to a faint hum beneath my ribs or catch the scent of ozone in a closed room. Memory has joined me everywhere. I am changed. I cannot unhear what I've heard, nor unsee what I've seen. And in the quiet moments, I understand that to remember is to keep the dead alive, and that some voices, once answered, never truly fall silent.